Good evening and welcome to Dog Talk. I'm Dan Camilleri.
And I'm Laura McKillop. We'd like to start by thanking Enduro for their ongoing support in bringing you our live weekly Q&A. Tonight we're fortunate enough to be speaking with Ryan Tate from Tate Animal Training Enterprises.
Ryan will be picking who he thinks has asked the best question of the night, and they will win a bag of Enduro high-energy food for working dogs with real kangaroo meat.
Hey Ryan, how are you going?
Froze it up a bit there, mate.
Guys, sorry, it froze up then probably at the most critical time. I tried opening my door here to see if I can get stronger Wi-Fi signals or something. But hopefully, it stays good for a bit now. But thanks so much for having me on here.
That's right. Actually, we were having this conversation over lunch yesterday with Shane, who was on last week, and we were mucking around, and someone told him that if your car the remote for your car doesn't work, if you put it in your mouth, it will enhance the signal. And maybe try that with your motor, mate.
I'll give it a go. Yeah.
Shane will be hating on me for that. I'll hear about that tomorrow. How's your day, mate? What did you get up to today?
Yeah, I mentioned to you before, I had all the kids come home from school with chicken pox, which was fun. And then apart from that, I've been training dogs on some new biosecurity targets, so some underground pathogens, and working on some rodent and feral animal detection dogs as well. So that took up today and will take up most of the rest of the week as well.
Well, I remember we touched on it a bit later. We had a chat the other day talking about what you're doing at the moment, and that's like a dream job for me, what you're doing there. And we'll dive into it. I'm sure we'll get there. But, mate, do you want to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Yeah, sure. So I run an animal training business. We specialize mainly in biosecurity and conservation dogs. My background is in actually marine biology. So I used to be a zookeeper. I used to train marine animals at Taronga Zoo, and I still consult with zoos and aquariums around Australia right now. I still probably about 1 or 2 a month I see. And I met through the zoo industry, I met a lot of police dog handlers and army explosive dog handlers, and I formed a few really good friendships, and I was really inspired by what they were doing. And it kind of sparked a bit of interest in me, 15 years ago or so, where suddenly training seals and doing seal shows, trying to pick up chicks seemed less interesting all of a sudden. And I really wanted to pursue and do something similar or akin to what these guys and girls were doing with the, particularly with the explosives dogs. That's what really kind of humbled me. And I used to think what I was doing was pretty cool. And then when I saw them using their animal training skills and their dogs for a higher purpose, something bigger than them, I think that was the part that really resonated with me. And then, through that world, I met Steve Austin, who was doing biosecurity and conservation dogs. Contact, kind of where we are now.
Yeah, sorry, mate, we lost you for a sec there after you mentioned Steve Austin.
Yeah, so I met Steve when he was training dogs to find penguins, and I was actually looking after the penguins at Taronga Zoo. And he and I hit it off. I did a few courses with him and his wife, Vicky, and I made some contacts through national parks and through truffle farms with them. And I left the zoo industry in 2015 to exclusively train detection dogs, and that's all I've been doing ever since then.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. So it's every day I pinch myself. I really it's probably the only thing I've ever been good at, and I mean that sincerely. Like, I don't really have any other good skills. I think it's the only thing I'm good at, and I'm lucky that I enjoy it, and I'm lucky that someone's willing to pay me money to do it. So
well, you mentioned there you got a couple of kids. Yep. So I think another skill would have been picking up chicks. You mentioned that earlier, so that might have been a skill as well, right?
Yeah, well, I think training seals and having a few good wingmen helped that process there. So it's it gives you a little bit of an extra a bit of credibility when you got a sea lion on your arm.
Mate, can we have a chat about the sea lion stuff?
Yeah.
Like, obviously, that's not something that everybody can say. Hey, I've trained a sea lion. Like, how do they think? And what are some takeaways you learned from them?
From marine animal training, the most obvious sort of parallel is that most of them have incredible food drive.
Yeah.
So are you guys still hearing me okay? Look like the screen froze then for a moment.
All
Still
good.
good, yeah. Incredible food drive and are real problem solvers. So for the most part, if you think of like a very, very high food drive, Malinois or Labrador or something like that, you're kind of in the right path, except that when they get frustrated or when you get something wrong, the consequences of a stuff up with a 300-400 kilo animal, when they redirect and you get a frustration bite, it's pretty severe. I've had a few, nothing too major, but I've had a few, I think I'm about to meet Jesus moments. The best parts for me really though were when I actually started to develop genuine relationships, and that was usually with some of the smaller, mature female animals whose food drive would fluctuate, and you really have to work with and incorporate and being cheeky and having fun with them. And I think that sort of stuff got me really excited when I was I had a bit of freedom to be able to work animals with toy-based rewards or variable rewards instead of just paying everything with food. And that got me super excited. And I loved working off relationships and with play in particular, which, I think has really set me up well for what I do now with detection dogs every day. Effectively, we're trying to do something sometimes pretty serious and utilize play as a reward. And working with sea lions kind of proofed me pretty well for that.
And they got some pretty serious teeth, right?
Yeah. I mean, depending on the species, look, they're all sharp teeth. They've all got incredible bite power, jaw strength, all that sort of stuff. The speed and the pressure behind a bite, even through a steel cap boot is terrifying.
And are they more likely like to try and bite you and get you into the water, or is it more so like just to come at you?
Both. Yeah, you'll get. People have been pulled in. I've been grabbed to be pulled into the water. I've been there when people have been pulled into the water, and but it's always like you can always understand it. Really, it's not like, oh shit, where did that come from? It is usually something where you go, yeah, okay, like that wasn't ready for that, or it's because there's usually pretty clear reasons. It's not, particularly because what we were doing is, our life was dedicated to their care and to their research and to their training. So you're pretty in tune with them. And any of the incidents I had where I got a little touch up.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. And you mentioned earlier there that like they're problem solvers.
Yeah, I mean, food runs out in the wild. You got to get creative, right? So they have that natural desire to overcome difficulties, to think about ways to get to their mates, get to the food, overcome beach masters. So they really love that challenge. They don't like playing it safe. And I think some zookeepers can fall into a trap of. And this goes for most species, they can fall into a trap of keeping everything cushy and keeping life very safe and very predictable and very easy. And what you create is an animal that becomes, neophobic, so scared of anything new. When in actual fact, they're all designed to deal with stress and overcome adversity and difficulty. So when I would train them, I'd like to make things as hard as possible, tricky as possible, physically and mentally challenge them. Even if it wasn't something that was going to be used on display, I love to get the animals to really use their brain and be creative. And I got to play around with leopard seals and doing free shaping with them. And telling them, I had a female who she passed away before I really kind of nutted it out. But I had a cue with her where I would say, show me something new. And she would just come up with something random. She'd spin through the water, or she'd glide, or she'd go and grab something, or she'd swim upside down, or she'd sing to me, or make a deep bassy sound from the back of her throat. And then I had a repeat cue. So if I like something, I'd say, repeat it, do it again. And she'd do it again. And then I could put it on cue and say, this is the cue. Now that's a new behavior that we just created in 3 repetitions. And, and then I had another male leopard seal, Casey, who I could train underwater behind acrylic glass. And I could do a whole 5-10 minute training session without any reinforcement because he knew that I was good for the money. So after the session would finish, I'd say, well done. I'd go around, go to the fridge, open up the fridge and jackpot reward him, and that kind of stuff was unreal. And I had an unreal manager at the time who trusted me and the other supervisor to cautiously but experiment with these animals and mentally challenge them. And I really got to do some unreal hands-on learning. And I'm back seeing all those same people and working with them literally next week on other projects too. So it's I'd be nowhere without that. I'm very thankful and appreciative of all the different mentors I've had along the way, from the zoo industry and from the dog training industry as well.
That's pretty cool, man. Just there with Casey, where you mentioned underwater, so you're on the other side of glass, I'm assuming.
Yep.
And so that's all like, excuse my arrogance, don't know a lot about sea lions, but I'm assuming that's all physical commands, not so much verbal, or
correct? Yeah. So
but
you can't, there would be a certain ability to hear through the glass probably for them. Yeah, but all the cues were visual cues for that. So most of the stuff that we taught with the sea lions and leopard seals, like you would a lot of working dogs, you'd have some kind of visual cue and some kind of verbal cue. But when you're talking up to potentially hundreds of cues going through different keepers and trainers, we used to get very, very, very specific about how you ask for certain behaviors. We'd have cue and criteria manuals, laminated books that would say, when you want this behavior, you ask for it this way, and the animal must respond like this. And that was really about a safety element. Again, we had a rule, you don't ask for anything twice if it hasn't been successful, because there's no check change. There's no way to correct a sea lion, for an incorrect response, or to tell them to knock it off if they start getting gnarly. So you have to make sure that you are on a path of success and super clear communication, because, unlike some of the other marine animals where you can just get up and walk away, you can't, and they know that. And I've been pinned in exhibits before. I've been there when other people have been blocked and the animals have said, I don't like the way the session's going, you're not leaving. And that's terrifying. So you want to be, super, super clear with saying, and that's probably, again, set me up for good detection dog training, is I'm really ridiculously consistent in what I ask from my dogs and what I expect from them, and how I'll reinforce that and what I'll tolerate. And, I've got 6 dogs here right now, including, including this guy here laying by my side, and they can all, effectively do what they want, but I have like major sensitivity to sound, and barking's not on, right? And the conservation dogs who are working around sensitive wildlife and stuff, they can't bark either. But all of my dogs know when I'm home, you bark once, the fun's over. The dog that barks, it gets separated. And that's, I don't go and kick them up the arse or anything. It's just a matter of just saying, you're in a pen or in a crate on your own. We don't bark in this household. And I think it's just that super, super clear and consistent communication that was instilled in me from day dot, that, I don't have a lot of rules, but the rules I have with the dogs, the behaviors that I've trained, the reinforcement I use, I'm consistent to the point of being crazy,
How's that roll into the father role?
Like my son, he's cheeky, and he winds up my wife a lot. Like he'll say, like, she'll go, why do you ask your dad for that? He's like, I would never ask dad for that, because I just know he's going to say no, but you might give in. Like he winds her up heaps. And the girls are still young. Our twins are only 3, and so Jen's always working around town. She doesn't do too many field trips away. So I get the luxury, I go away for 4 or 5 days at a time, and I come home and I can be hands-on, all excitement, all go dad, and I can give them 100% focus. Whereas they wear Jen away over the week a little bit more. So I'm not putting shit on her for not being consistent.
Absolutely. Tough kid.
Yeah.
So what made you go from sea lions to dogs? How'd that all happen?
Yeah. So, I mean, it was a bit of a perfect storm in the sense that I had in that role, I was a unit supervisor of Marine Animal Department. I had a fantastic team. I'd been to Antarctica and Kangaroo Island, and I'd worked in all these different amazing places. And I probably I ticked off everything that I could have ever possibly wanted to tick off. I was so stoked with how that job went, and my position came and I was seeing these guys in the army and the cops and all the conservation and biosecurity people doing stuff with their dogs. And I had a little shepherd cross that I was doing a bit of agility work with and loving it. And I took some long service leave and I dipped my toes in the water. I did a bit of truffle work. I did a bit of private narcotic detection work as well. Got a couple of new dogs, and I just hit a point where I don't really care how much money I make. I had a son who that kind of, I guess, what motivated me was I didn't want to play it safe. I wanted to follow my heart, and I thought I wanted to show my son that, I wanted to be a part of something where I really felt I was contributing in a different way. Whereas at the zoo, I felt like, I'd maybe run out of ideas, or I was kind of felt like maybe it was just time for me to move on. And the dog world, it just, once I fully committed, once I put 2 feet in that water, I met some of the most amazing people, lifelong mates, and I did a couple of free demos at some dog day out things. I met people from national parks and from biosecurity. And, the first gig I got with national parks was a voluntary based job, but they wanted they wanted to see if I could handle some of their dogs. And I did it, and I thought it'd be maybe a summer fling. And I think I got my first 3 or 4 days in the field. And then I got back from that job, and the phone didn't stop. I moved out of Sydney. I moved to regional New South Wales, and thought I'd get less work, and the work just kept growing, and so my team grew, my dogs grew, and I still pinch myself. I still, I get awkward when I even think about it, because I don't know how it all happened. It's just, it's a lot of appropriate skills. And, I've done a shitload of courses and study and networking and times at dog club and volunteer stuff at zoos and aquariums. And I've done my time in the trenches, but I guess because I loved it all, it never felt like I was in the trenches. I loved all the study I did. I loved all my volunteer stuff. I loved all the dog club stuff. So, I now look back on it and go, I've been doing this for over 20 years now, full time. And, it started as a kid, and it's never felt like a job, really.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome.
That's amazing, man. That's really cool.
So what's day to day for you, though? Like you're saying, you're booked up full time, you're doing all these things, but what is it that you're actually doing day to day? Yeah, sure. It's a good question. And it does change a little bit from week to week, month to month, season to season. And I'll explain why. So our primary work in terms of our dogs is biosecurity and conservation. So where that layers down is, in terms of the biosecurity, you've got your generic kind of, we have contracts that either put us in different airports or shipping ports to look for a certain list of contraband or biosecurity matter that needs to be checked for and can't get through a certain location. Those gigs can be super regular. We've got a couple of them that are regular at the moment in Port Macquarie.
And that's essentially, a full-time gig for 2.5 people within our team at the moment. Then we have biosecurity weeds, like priority weeds that we're working on. And some of them grow in the snowy mountains and are only accessible for about 12 to 16 weeks a year. So those weeds, we want to completely 100% eradicate. I want to find every single last one of them. So essentially, as soon as the weather permits, we're up there. We're hitting it as hard as we can. We're running ourselves and the dogs as much as we can. It ends up being about sort of a week on, a week off. We'll do a couple of back-to-back weeks, but effectively week on, week off all through summer in the Snowy Mountains region. There'll also be other targets we might be looking for up there: foxes, cats, maybe endangered small mammals as well. And then we do a lot of what is probably the coolest part of our job. We do a lot of koala detection. And again, that tends to be a more winter-centric kind of job. And so next week and the week after, a few of our staff and our koala detection dogs will be working around Port Macquarie and the mid-coast, looking for koala scats and or live animals in the trees, and using that to inform councils, environmental consultancies, national parks and whatnot as to where either the koala corridors are, where the hotspots are, whether things should be developed or not. It can impact the route of roads and constructions, and it's part of those preliminary surveys around, people have got to have homes, but koalas do too.
Like environmental studies based on the future development.
Exactly. Yeah. So, right. I mean, that's it in a very sort of, broad, crude sense, and then there's other little niche jobs around, other plants or in invasive species. Sometimes as well, we will be required, if we're working on islands or in sanctuaries and whatnot, we'll aid in the, whatever we're looking for, whether it be a weed or a fox or a cat or a rabbit, will aid in the trapping or the eradication process through various other means. And whenever I get people asking me, mate, I want to do what you do, the two pieces of advice I give them is, number one, you've got to have a good dog, but number two, you've got to have some other skills that are relevant to that profession. So within my team, I've got people that are absolute plant gurus, or they're koala experts or fox trapping experts, or they have a really good understanding of the outback or certain habitats or biosecurity policy and legislation. And so having those supplementary skills, understanding scientific methodology and stuff like that, at the moment for our team is actually more important than their animal training ability. We've got, between myself, Jen, and particularly Claire, we've got a lot of runs on the board with training detection dogs. So we really, when we're looking to engage subcontractors or new staff, we don't necessarily need amazing trainers. We need people who are great dog handlers, but have a really good skill set elsewhere that is going to be applicable to what we're searching for.
Man, I think I can help you. I'm mediocre with a dog, but I'm really good at knowing all the best drive-throughs for New South Wales.
Oh, that's good. That's handy.
That's probably a skill I can help you with, right? Everyone needs to eat.
Oh, well, you're almost there, because I've always said when I'm doing the road trips, I need someone that knows where all the cleanest dunnies are on the highways. So that's drive-throughs.
Really there, right? Port Macquarie, KFC. Yeah. Always had a good zinger burger there, mate.
Very good.
Actually, do you want to go to that question?
Yeah. While we're talking about your team and what you're looking for, Karen Higgins has asked, what is your team and how many human and canine?
Yeah. So in terms of exactly permanent dogs and permanent staff, so 6 full-time staff, 6 full-time dogs, but they're the dogs that live here with me. Many of my staff have their own dogs that do get used occasionally on certain jobs. And then I've got 3 amazing subcontractors that I use on a regular basis, all of which have multiple dogs. So, you know, within my network that I'm using every month, there'd be probably, say, 10 handlers and maybe about 20 dogs all up. And a lot of those dogs overlap. And sometimes if it's a really sensitive site or getting access is really difficult, and like some of the areas we work, for example, will be either ongoing mine sites or prospective mine sites. And so the access to these locations is super, super strict, and there's all sorts of confidentiality. And if we're going to go on looking for things and they've got to shut down a mine, obviously there's millions of dollars at stake.
That's right.
And so instead of me just going, oh, it'll take me and one dog 3 weeks, they go, that's not on. So then you get like your best team of subcontractors and whatnot go, right, we're going to hit it with 6 dogs and we're going to knock it out in a week. And they go, right, that's, you know, the cost of us engaging the subbies is nothing compared to
their production costs.
Exactly right. So that's where sometimes those subbies really get me out of hot water, and I do the same for them. They get jobs like that where you know, the pressure is really on for renewable energies and for the ongoing, you know, grassroots sort of energy sectors to lift their game. And the dogs are being, you know, becoming, along with drones, just such a common tool, whether they're looking for soil contamination, water leaks, or invasive species or protected species. These big companies, they're not doing it through gritted teeth. It's not like we're getting out there and they're going, we're getting here because we have to. They're all trying to lift their game, you know. That's so right. They want to be doing the best practice. So they're getting the dog. Yeah.
Sorry, just on that, they'd be getting payoffs on their carbon footprint and emissions, right?
Well, it depends on what they're doing with the land. And sometimes we've gone on to environments that, you know, would potentially be listed for, you know, whatever kind of development or whatever kind of use. And then they send in a bunch of ecos and dog handlers and whatnot. And then they work out that, hey, this is an amazing offset area. It's got all these amazing species in it. And then they end up pumping a lot of money into preserving that habitat and, yeah, looking at things like offset schemes or yeah, I mean, that's not, I don't want to speak out of school because it's not my area of expertise, but I know there has been sites that have been listed for potential development, but then after the surveys, they go, wow, it's actually, you know, this land is too important for a variety of different flora and fauna species to develop for any purposes. So, you know, there is a lot of really good news stories that come out of it for us that, you know, at a state and at a federal level, they cop a hard time no matter what they do. But we've been there on the ground when they're trying to implement these things and trying to actually look for ways to have progress in capital works, but not compromise the environment, or in certain cases, actually trying to go, righto, what can we do in the peripheries to make this area better? So when we leave, when we finish the highway upgrade or whatever it is, we've actually made the landscape better. And that might mean buying up surrounding farms, treeing up areas, making better underpasses, connecting habitat better. And, you know, sometimes we really can progress change and improve the environment. And, you know, we did some surveys just here in town, you know, chipping away at them over 7 years, doing surveys in a couple of really key areas that were absolutely listed for arterial road upgrades and housing developments, shopping malls, golf clubs. And through years and years and years of surveys of going, oh, better check it again, this area's been locked up. And it's now, you know, there's areas that have been bought by national parks, that have been bought by philanthropists and other organizations that, because the surveys have shown, no, this is super important for koalas and all these tree species and quolls and bandicoots, that these areas that would have been golf courses and highways and whatnot, and now these thriving nature reserves that we get to go back and see. And I show my kids and say, you know, before you were born, this was supposed to be, you know, all bulldozed and be nothing but pubs and shopping centers and, take them for a walk through there and point out koalas and, regent bowerbirds and stuff like that. So, it's cool to be part of that process and not, we don't get no one in our team is cynical. It's easier to be cynical from the outside and go, everything's getting bulldozed. This is a shit show. But when you actually see what's happening on the ground, there are some good stories out there.
Absolutely. And while you're talking about like how big your team is there, I suppose that would help with a lot of your odor imprint as well. So you're not constantly training different target odors and trying to imprint dogs, right?
Yeah,
like
100%, mate.
That's a kind of a couple of days in itself.
Yeah, and I mean, what we tend to do now, we have a couple of dogs on, like we say, fur dogs, so live animal dogs or fur. And so we just get them to just alert to any fur. I don't care what it is. If it's in the environment, tell me about it. Because then what I can do is I can deduce what you're alerting to. I can use binoculars, I can use thermal imaging cameras or whatever it is. And then those dogs as well, we also get them to do predator scats, because we get a lot of work with quolls, with wild dogs, with feral cats, and foxes obviously as well. And so whether you're looking for the live animal, you want to find the den, you want to find the warren, you want to find whatever it is, or you want to find evidence of them, if those dogs will say, I'll show you where all the fur is and I'll show you where the scats are, then you got like, it's actually quite an easy concept to teach the dog. And it's kind of natural, particularly for the spaniels for male dogs, like the Mallee here, like, predator scats, he's just going to check it out anyway. You mark and you reward that. And the dog goes, okay, I'll show you every fox turd along the way here. And, and then they learn very, very quickly. I'm not interested in kangaroos. I'm not interested in, possums. And then they just go, right, I hone in on the ferals that are in this area. And, that concept is, like, it's pretty much as I'm only training the dogs two things: predators and fur, predator poo and fur. But the applications of that are super, super broad. So we have those generalist type dogs, which are, they're flat chat all the time. And then our dogs that are working on invasive plants and, some of the koala dogs and the dogs working on contaminated soil and things like that. They're very, very specific dogs. So it's the opposite end of the spectrum to them. It's basically ignore everything and just tell me that one friggin' thing, because that's really important. So, super generalist dogs and then very, very specific dogs.
Do you find that's a specific dogs, like when you mark and you reward, whether it be food or a ball, right? That's something we can give. But those dogs that are chasing what you refer to as fur, do you find it a bit harder to mark those because they could find the chase more thrilling
100%,
than
100%.
Yeah. So how do you go about rewarding that?
So it's, this is where, and I was thinking about it prior, when I was talking to Jen prior to coming on the podcast, and we're talking about, Kelpies and working dogs and whatnot, and how the dogs that I choose to be those fur dogs are much more natural hunters. And so all I have to do to them is basically work on stopping them and just going, the instinct is there to find, right? So you just got to stop on flush. As soon as that animal moves, you hear it move, you see it move, whatever it be, handbrakes, automatic on, automatic stop on flush. And I drill it into those dogs from day dot. I usually get 2 puppies at a time. And whichever one is like, I hate using these kind of terms, but whichever one is smarter, like a bit more of a thinking dog, I'll go, yeah, that'll be my targeted species dog. And whichever one is just more goey, more hunty, more drivey, more fearless and just doesn't care about getting knocked up, I'll go, that'll be my fur dog. Because I know they'll run into blackberries and brambles and flush rabbits out. They'll go down a fox den, they'll jump on a ship in the middle of the night with me in the middle of a harbour and look for rats, and they'll just go for it. They're not going, what's in it for me? They're going, I just friggin' love this job, And so it's like, you're not always going to want that kind of dog, right? Sometimes you're going to want that sensitive dog that really thinks and is very polite and is analytical and goes, I really want that ball. I've got a very high reward drive. Particularly the dogs that we're working on the soil at the moment, they need to have very, very high reward drive because the task they're doing is quite boring, you know, whereas the dogs, once you get a good dog and you say, mate, your dog is to go and flush bunnies for me, they go jam your tennis ball up your butt, Ryan, you know, like flushing bunnies. That's about as good as life gets. And so all I really have to do to them is just say, all right, we don't chase birds, we don't chase kangaroos, but those rabbits, I'm going to praise you for getting as close as possible and then stopping at the last minute. Same with the fox, same with the cat, even the same with the koala. A lot of the dogs that we've trained to find koalas that know that they're not just looking for the pellet, but they're looking for the live animal. And I'm sure some of my followers that have known the company for a long time would shudder at this thought. But when the dogs find the koalas up the tree and they stop, sit, and they look at me, they're not looking at me going, I love koalas. They're looking at me going, get the rifle. You know, that's what they're thinking in the dog's head. Right. Is they're a hunt. They've been bred for this for 700 years, you know, this sort of process of hunting. But the beauty of all those little spaniels that we use is their prey drive's pretty low. To pull them up, to get them to stop, to get them to not bite, to get them to not bark, it's not that hard. It's very, and a lot of them instinctively do it. As soon as they see something move, their instinct is just to, you know, it's like you see good German short-haired pointer pups, you know, they go and point instinctively. It's, you know, 5-6 weeks of age. Good springers will, you know, and cockers will hunt like crazy. And then when that bird springs or when that rabbit springs, they pause, they think about it. If you give them a chance to run and grab, for sure they'll go for it. I've seen that happen. But yeah, to pull them up is nowhere near as hard as it might be for a terrier, you know, or you know, or something like a sight hound.
Yeah. Would it be fair to say, like someone like a springer, for example, they're looking up naturally because they're waiting for that thing to fall down because they're looking for those shadows, right?
Yeah, and
you're gonna get that pause.
Yeah, and you see some of them are naturally more birdy than others as well. So they'll naturally have that look up instinct, and others will be a bit more sort of looking for that ground flush. And you just kind of work to their strengths, really. And I mean, that's kind of the beauty of where our business has been for a while, is that, you know, some people invest all this time in one dog and go, I've got this dog and it must find this thing in this environment. And it's like, yeah, anything's possible, but, you know, you're going to be working against the tide the whole time. Whereas we've got enough work on and enough people in our network that I can get a dog and I can work it for 6 months or 12 months and go, yeah, it's just, you know, it's okay, but man, it would be a really good, you know, weed dog, or it'd be a really good explosives dog, or whatever it might be. And then I can channel that dog's path based on its personality. And that's, you know, what I say to everyone is, like, every dog can learn scent detection, 100%. Every dog can learn it, but not every dog can be a detector dog. And it's, you know, and that's an important thing to acknowledge. And even within our team, as the dogs have grown, we've narrowed down the jobs which certain dogs do. And just go, you know what, I'm not going to do that with him anymore. He's like, yes, he can, but we've got better dogs. And I want to give my clients the absolute duck's nuts. And I want to make sure that the dogs are excelling and loving it. And, you know, and then we just niche down on what that dog excels at. And, you know, it's you know, we're super lucky.
And on from that, Deb Edens asked, where do you source your dogs from and how do you assess them for your work? But you sort of spoken about how you assess them individually for what job, but is there anything they need to meet before you take them on?
Yeah. So, I mean, usually 90% of the time I'm looking at litters, and I will check out the bitch, and if I can, check out the dog. I want very bold dogs most of the time, like super bold, in your face, happy-go-lucky dogs. I love like ball and retrieving instincts. So that it's not like a cutoff if the dog just has higher food drive, but if the parents naturally have high ball drive, I'll go for that. And yeah, that willingness to just engage their nose and just go for it. I've assessed a lot of, you know, 10 to 10-month-old to sort of 3-year-old dogs, and like none have ever worked out ideal for me. It's always been, I've got, and this is, I always talk to my mates about these being unicorns, when someone goes, wouldn't it be great if you could just get 1-year-old dogs that are gone through all the teething and all the rubbish and ready to go? I'm like, they're unicorns, mate. They're unicorns. But an unreal breeder, and some really, really good trainers from down south. I was chatting to last week and just saying how after losing a dog last year, I got my eyes out for something pretty special at the moment. And they mentioned this 18-month-old bitch to me, and like she just sounds like a dream dog. And I'm just like, don't get your hopes up, Ryan. And all my mates are going, you're not looking for another unicorn, are you? I'm like, this dog sounds like it. But usually, yeah, I just go for puppies now. I just get 8-week-old puppies from breeders that I know have robust, strong, drivey dogs that will produce puppies that are a nice little blank canvas. Jen's incredibly passionate about puppy development, so she basically makes them bomb proof around the kids, around Bunnings, around the shops, takes them everywhere, puts the ball drive into them. I usually do the crate training. I can nod off pretty quickly, so I usually go in the spare room and do the crate training at night. And yeah, Jen does everything else. And then, once they're chasing a ball and loving their food and happy with everything, with their socialization, then I'm imprinting them.
And how about the beginning of Deb's question? What about sourcing them? How do you go about sourcing?
Yeah, look, I mean, I've got a pretty good network of different breeders that I've used in Australia, and I kind of know now, like everyone has their own little language and little words that they use. And I sort of now spend enough time with different spaniels and labs and cockers from different lines. And I sort of know what those different lines and breeders are producing. And so there's probably half a dozen different breeders, different spaniel breeders in Australia that I look at. And based on what the papers say, I have a pretty good idea of what that's going to produce and go, that's likely to produce something that's going to be like this for me. And then, and they know what I'm kind of after too. So if I say to them, hey, I want a balls to the wall, mental, off the chart drive dog. Brett from Bodrum Gun Dogs in WA. I've got 2 of his dogs, and he produces working line cockers. And the last one I said, mate, I need a maniac. I need a dog that's going to, get into planes with me in the middle of the night, jump into the choppers, not think about it, get up in 2 a.m. and just launch into the car and say, let's get him. And boy, did he give me that. I've got this little black cocker, Scout. It does not matter where you are, what time of day, what's going on. She is up for it. She does not think. It's just, she'll jump on my shoulders and just hit it and let's go. We had a job last week. She's only 2 now, and I had a massive job last week, super high profile site right in the middle of Sydney. And I was like, I'm just taking this dog. I had no idea. I forgot. I'd never taken her to Sydney. I walked her through Haymarket. I walked her through the Cross, out on a Friday night, sleeping up on a balcony in a high-rise building, getting into elevators, working into airports. Never took a backward step, not once, just owning it, did not care, and buskers and random dogs all through the city. And, there was nearly a punch up in town. She just didn't care. Nothing fazed her, whereas, like some of my weed dogs, they're real edgy at night. They don't work at night. They look for weeds in the day in the tops of beautiful mountains, right? So if I took them into that setting, they would crumble, no doubt. I have no doubt they'd be shitting themselves. I could get them through it, but, they would not thrive. She got to that and just went, bring it on. I want more chaos, more, just the more we threw her, she's like, yeah, this is the best. So yeah, that's kind of, and Brett knew that's what I wanted. He's like, that's what you're going to get, mate. He's like, this dog from 5 weeks of age was, like growling the other dogs off the teat and stealing toys and, bashing everyone up. I'm like, that's the puppy for this job. So, yeah.
And sound environmentals, that'd be something that's really important to you, right? Like, because you don't know where you're going to be.
Exactly, mate. And I mean, again, I think, Jen does a pretty bloody good job if we get 8-week-old puppies of putting that into them. Most spaniels deal very, very well with sound, just with the nature of gun dogs. Most gun dog breeders will fire off a few rounds above their head when they're puppies anyway, and just kind of from day dot, that sort of, when you think about it, if you're proofing them for gunshot, from that early age, that most of the sound sort of stuff is going to be okay. So then it's just a matter of getting in and out of strange cars, lifts, see-through staircases, that sort of stuff that can throw them. But again, if I'm usually raising 2 dogs at a time, if one's a little bit more sensitive, I'll say that's a dog that's going to work in national parks, and one dog's a maniac. And so that's going to be the dog that does all that sort of urban stuff.
Actually, it's funny you mentioned there see-through staircases. People don't understand how hard that actually throws a dog, right?
Yeah, very, very. And I mean,
some of us would never think of that.
No, and I mean, to me,
God, it throws me, let alone a dog.
Yeah, for sure. And I think for me, so many of those things I've known for 20 years that it's like one of the first things I do. I'm walking around the streets looking for grates with stormwater drains and puppies and just feeding them on top of it. So it's been a long time since I've had a dog freak out at something like that, because I'm, just so hell-bent on making sure it's not a problem, that we're always kind of dealing with that sort of stuff head on. But yeah, certainly I know, my mates that have worked in the army and have had to acquire, just through the nature of their programs, acquire mature dogs that are, going to be ready to go in 6 to 8 weeks, and how many dogs they have to sack for things like that. They just, they won't go into a gymnasium, shiny floors, or they won't go into a shopping center, polished floors, or see-through stairs, elevators, escalators, and I think as well, I give them a hard time, but I say to people, I don't think Mals and Springers are that smart. Like, personally, I don't think they're that smart. I think they're just driven. They love their rewards. They're driven and willing. They don't overthink that sort of stuff. And that's, quite why I like working with them, because I can see, I remember I was taking a dog into the ABC twice. This happened to me at different ABC studios, once with a working line shepherd and once with a Springer. And the glass doors and the glass elevators and the chaos, I saw as I was approaching, that dog's not going to deal with it that well. That dog's not going to deal with it that well. I just did a Yui, walked away, charged up with the ball, got him psyched, and then threw the ball through the front door. And they're just like, it is on like Donkey Kong. And then that drive kind of overrides their intelligence, or their fear responses. And they just sort of go, right, the game's on. And it's, I often liken it to young boys looking at cleavage, like regardless of how big the bloke is next to the woman, and even like butt cracks, plumbers cracks and whatnot, like it overtakes any common sense that you have. Like, there's certain things that we're just so hardwired to look at and stare at for too long, that I kind of lean into that for those dogs. Like, this dog's bordering on crazy, obsessed for the ball. I'm going to utilize that to get them through, very scary experiences.
I could take that somewhere else, but I won't go with that. And you mentioned your Springers, Mals, Labs, mate. What breed of dog? Like, what breed of dog suits you, or are there breeds that don't suit as well?
Yeah. So, and this is like in certain circles, it can become a bone of contention, and it needn't be, because the truth is, there's no perfect dog, right? There's no one dog that can do it all. But there's going to be dogs that are much, much more comfortable with having loss after loss after loss, or no genuine wins, right? And for me, the more intelligent and sensitive breed varieties, I think, struggle with without those high volume wins. So a lot of what I'm looking for, well, everything that I'm looking for really is very, very, very unlikely to find the actual thing, right? And yes, that can be remedied by, setting up training aids and whatnot, but it's not quite as good as the real thing. So, some of your border collies, for example, if you're working on a job where you're going to get lots of real wins and the dog's going to get a reward and it's a fairly straightforward target, let's say a really productive truffle farm. Let's say, we've done a lot of carcass work where we're looking for carcasses in certain areas. Border collies love it, excel at it, do really, really well, super clear criteria, enough reinforcement to keep them engaged in the process.
But they need the wins.
They need the wins, right? Yeah. And they need and I think they need a really good handler, and I don't think, in my experience, they don't transfer through multiple handlers as readily well as a gun dog would, right? Absolutely. Much the same as the Kelpies too, right? So that the Kelpies, and Aussie Shepherds, for one person can be the most phenomenal, dynamic, diverse, loyal dog in the world. But then you throw them into a team environment and say, I want you to do all these complex things for all these different people in all these complex environments. And they're not wired like that. And they just sort of go, well, I don't really like that person that much. Whereas the Spaniel and the Labrador will go, I like the job. The job's great. And I don't care who's holding on to the end of the lead because I love my job, and off we go. And that's what they should be like, really. A good detection dog should love the task and not be disheartened by a loss. I always say to people, the Spaniels think every day at work is the best day of their life. If they don't find anything, it's the best day of their life.
Yep.
But when they find something, it's just a bonus. It's just a cherry on top. They get the ball, like, oh my God, I searched all day and I got a tennis ball. And they're just going, how freaking good is that? Yeah. Whereas I found with my Aussie Shepherd, not this Mal, but my older one, with the things that I've imprinted in them, if they didn't get a win within 10 minutes or half an hour, they'd be like, almost looking like I was about to belt them. Like, no, mate, you're doing great. I'm like, I haven't found the real thing yet. And they're so smart that they know when I've hid the targets out for them, and they kind of do a half-assed indication on that because they know that I just placed it there for them, and they're just too friggin' smart. So, again, I kind of go, well, what was this dog bred for? This dog was bred to run all day with lots of other dogs looking for small things with a bunch of different hunters behind them. Like, that's pretty bloody compatible to what I want to do. And I wouldn't run my Cocker Spaniel in a sheep herding trial, so it's like, kind of by the same logic, I wouldn't run a border collie professionally. Having said that, we've got border collies in our team. We've got 2 in our team, so I'm contradicting myself here. But I'm saying I use that kind of logic, and I go, we use those 2 border collies for very specific purposes where we go, they're killing it. They love it. They know what it is. We don't have to hammer them hard. It's like a day here and there, and they're brilliant at it. And we know that those 2 border collies are going to love it and they're going to smash it, but the volume of work they do doesn't amount to the volume of work the Spaniels do.
Yeah. And it's actually interesting that you mentioned there about the dogs working for, and doesn't matter who holds the lead, because we're actually talking about that this morning here. So my Dutch Shepherd, for example, I was doing a heap of work with that dog, and whenever I go away, no respect for Natalie.
Yeah.
Right. And then I was really busy for a period there, and Shane was doing a lot of work with him, a lot of scent detection. And then I noticed that he'd roost around and he'd kind of take me for granted a bit. But then when Shane was on holidays last week and I was working him every day, Shane rocks up and he's like, who are you?
Yeah.
But whoever had that ball was like the remote to run this dog. Yeah. It was really funny. Like, we had the conversation, like, so is this dog man's best friend or ball's best friend?
Yeah. And I mean, and sometimes you want to put that that ball drive above people for the sake of productivity within a company and giving that dog a good life, you know. And I saw it happen, you know, in some agencies and other organizations, and even in the zoo world, where you would get amazing trainers who perhaps were, you know, threatened by some of their colleagues or wanted to, in some way, shape or form, elevate themselves, and they would work or drive an animal so much and lean into them so much and so much into that relationship development and that bond, knowing full well that just by chipping away at it every day, that animal's going to start to turn their nose up at other people. Yeah. And then they're like, oh, shit, oh, he won't work without me here. Oh, he didn't do any bag checks without me. Oh, she won't move out without me there. And, you know, and I think that's a sign of a pretty shitty trainer, to be honest.
So important, right?
Yeah. And I, like, when I left the zoo, I wanted to know that for the welfare of those animals, as well as the team of keepers that I loved, that none of that was going on, you know, that I never want an animal that's like only going to work for me. It's like, oh, it's Ryan's dog. Like, no one else can handle him. That's horseshit. That means I'm a bad trainer. If I can't pass those skills over to my team, I run a team of professional trainers and handlers. I should be able to pass over the dogs to most of the people. Now, not everyone handles my Mal, but I've got 3 wonderful handlers that handle him. But he's an 8-year-old dog. Like, there is a certain point where it just becomes about, you know, do I have everyone trained on everything? No. Whereas the young dogs that are coming up through the ranks, they're learning to work for every single person that's here right now. So, yeah, I think it's, you know, when your organization is growing for the welfare of the dogs working there professionally, you need more than one person to be able to handle it well. But having said that, around the house, he's definitely a pain in the ass for Jen when I'm not here. And I reckon it's because the kids feed him and let him in and, you know, and just throw food on the ground. And like, he works unbelievably well, but he is 100% a house pet too, you know, and his drive is so good that he can go from sleeping on the couch to a hard day's work, no worries. But it does mean sometimes I'll hear Jen go, come on, mate, inside. And then he's like, oi, sit inside. Raff. And he's like, you know, running around with the kids. They're throwing a ball for him or feeding him scrambled eggs off their breakfast or whatever. So, you know, again, you can kind of understand why he might discriminate a little bit there. But at work, he's an honest, wonderful dog.
You actually touched on 2 more things. One was usability within your team with your dogs, which I think you touched on that really well. And the other one I was going to ask was integration with your family. Like you've just mentioned the Mal there. How about the rest of your team? They integrate a lot, or you keep them more professional with your dogs? It's
a little bit more professional, and it depends on the individual dog and their job. So what we try and say to people, and it can look kind of boring and a bit mechanical around the farm here for the fully established working dogs, and that's by design. So most of them work 5 to 7 days on and then 5 to 7 days off. Those 5 to 7 days on, they're working anywhere between 10 and 30 kilometers a day in hard terrain, as are their handlers. So when they get home, I need them to rest up. I need them to put on weight. I need them to calm down. I need them to clear their head. So they will usually be kennelled for most of the day with a compatible dog that they like and that they want to snuggle with and whatnot. And then they'll be let out, you know, 4 to 5 times a day for anywhere from 10 minutes to half an hour for a groom, a cuddle, check over, you know, run down to the dam for a quick swim and then put them away again. And like, it's kind of boring and a bit like, yeah, come on out, have a run, go to the toilet. The kennels are big enough for them. You know, they're massive kennels, but it's quiet. Got music on. I've got cameras on everyone, motion sensors. Everything's fully controlled. It's a bit boring. Everyone's got a Kong or a chew toy and that's about it. But mate, when you go into the field, you're eating at the dinner table with the handler. You can sleep in the swag. You can sleep on the end of the bed. you go for swims every day, you're running 30 Ks, your handler's grooming you for an hour at the end of each day. The enriched life that they have that week in work is insane. It's off the chart. So it's like they get the most unbelievable dog experience for 5 to 7 days straight, and then they come home, have a quiet week. And, you know, I often say to people, you know, what do you think the dog really wants here? It's like the life they have here, or just sitting in a backyard and going to the dog park every day. It's like, It's a no-brainer, right? These dogs have the most amazing adventures. And the reason that it's sort of 5 to 7 on and 5 to 7 off is because they just lose condition, because they run so hard. So you literally need them to bulk up, put on weight, you know, let their fur sort of recover if they've been working above the tree line in the snowy region. You know, the sunlight can be a bit harsh on their body. So we literally they would work every day of the week if we let them, but you start to see fur gets a bit scrappy. They get a little bit too lean. And so we go, no, we want them to bulk up and rest, and then, you know, go at it again a week later.
Geez, your dog's getting some genetic fulfillment, mate.
Oh, mate, it's, you know, like you look at the canine predatory sequence, and, you know, you look at what my dogs do for work, and they basically, you know, they run all day trying to acquire odor. They make odor. They hone in on the scent cone. They find a spot. They alert to it. And then what I do is I throw the tennis ball or a ball on a string out. So they get the chase. They nail it. And then when they nail it, I play tug with them. I roll around in the dirt. I have a full fight with them. I'll jump in the rivers, whatever. I go, you know, my reward event is just off the chart when they make a real find in the bush. And then I feed them, I groom them. And it's like they've gone on a full-on hunt. You know, they've been working all day. They've found it. It's run. They've caught it. They've killed it. They've fought for it. They've eaten it. And then they've groomed and they've rested and they've slept together, you know, in the swag or in the hotel or wherever we're staying. So, yeah, the fulfillment, like you just said, you know, the fulfillment they get outside the house is through the roof. And, and by design, then you can't have the yin without the yang. You've got to be calm when you're at home. You've got to put on weight.
Absolutely. Yeah. Man, I can go on a massive arc of everything we got here, but we've got a few questions. We'll get into some of those.
Yeah. Samantha Alford's asked, she said, firstly, thanks for taking the time to do the Q&A. Her question is...
And this is awesome.
My eyes aren't even working now. How would you recommend someone getting started with scent detection?
Look, I think it can be really, really, really easy. It can start off something so simple. And I do this with my puppies every day. I hold them by the collar. I wave their favorite reward under their nose, whether it be a ball, a toy, or a treat. I throw it. Usually I start off in short length grass and I throw it, say, 2-3 meters away. I let it settle for a couple of seconds. Then I'll let the puppy go. Right? The dog runs off. It uses its nose. Once the treat or the toy is still, it uses its nose to find it, grab it, and celebrate. That's literally where I start. From that moment, I make the throw longer, the grass longer, the environment more complicated. And I'm getting the dog to hone in their skills on scent detection with their favorite reward. It's just a game for the dog, but what they don't realize is they're learning how to work scent cones, how to look for disturbances in the environment. And it's a wonderful cross-training exercise that I can do even whilst I'm imprinting an odor every day. So the imprinting part is obviously a little more technical, but essentially I take the dog into a very, very, very boring, quiet place. I've got my, a couple of training areas at home. There's nothing else in the room. There's usually a jar or a brick or a tube or a PVC pipe on the ground with the target odor in it. As soon as the dog looks at it, sniffs at it, investigates it, I mark it, usually by saying yes, and then I reward the dog, and I repeat that process. You bring those two exercises together eventually, and it's not that complicated. It's honestly, the hardest part is about trying to find the right dog for the job and to desensitize the dog to all the environmental distractions. I think you'll find that most professional trainers will say it's about the environment, about proofing the dog to the environment, the multitude of different environments to repeat that process.
100%. Like, and that process you talked about there, like you're actually just teaching that dog to hunt, right?
Yeah,
it's already, and you're already picking something with that, that genetic, that DNA to want to do that, and you're just enhancing that and fast tracking it along.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was chatting to a dear colleague who suddenly lost a dog just yesterday, actually. Looked like she had an aneurysm, and we're talking about getting him a new young dog, and he's a really, really experienced handler and done a bit of training himself. And I said, mate, these young, well-bred bitches we get, the genetics these days are so good that by 10, 11 months, like they're ready to work. Their body's not physically there, but you can start using them here and there. They can start going on field trips. They can do 5 minutes here and there because they're just wired so well that, yeah, like you just said, if you just kind of harness that and redirect it, you fast track it. And with the exception of that crazy cocker or all the bitches I've had, by 10, 11 months of age, I'm like, tick, they're finished. I'm just waiting for their bodies to fully form before I start working them.
What about dogs you get that are over the top? You ever get some that are just over the top? Well, I'll give you an example. I got one of my males here. Like, it's like she looks for a tunnel.
Yeah.
Like, everything's out here, and like, yeah, it's like it's just over the top. How do you just put those guys away and let them mature a bit, or give them a little bit less to do, or?
Yeah, look, I actually try and do a bit of like drive reduction. I actively do drive reduction, and I remember speaking to I went and checked out Lisa Carter's Malinois Pre, and
it's funny you say that. Lisa actually bred this dog here, massive drive.
Yeah, and I remember Lisa saying, and I was pretty green when I went and checked those dogs out, that his toy drive was just so ludicrous and off the chart that it was actually better. You get better clarity to just work him on food and even have I'm paraphrasing here. This is a conversation probably 10 years old, but that just those medium food rewards actually was getting clarity and better response from a dog. And my sort of naive brain at the time was like, you're missing out on, are you missing out? I didn't question it because I saw the results, right? The dog won the Easter show and every open event there ever bloody was. But I remember just thinking, oh God, why wouldn't you use the toy? But yeah, it was too much. So yeah. So one of the soil dogs that I'm working with at the moment, her ball drive can often be too much, that she just comes screaming out of the gates and just alerts to the first tube she sees because she just wants that friggin' ball so much. So we've got a rule with her is that we bring her out for 10 minutes before a session and let her burn off a bit of steam with socializing. And then I calm her down with a little bit of food. I'll get a little bit of tucker into her belly, she's had a little bit of fun. And then she's like, okay, all right, now I can think. And she actually searches better. So I actually end up doing the opposite of punching drive into a dog. And I go, actually, I'm going to dial this dog back because its willingness and its drive is actually getting in the way of progress. And, I probably have Lisa to thank for that because I looked at that dog. She threw something like 9 or 10 toys in the backyard, had him in plats, and then released him. I shit you not, the dog picked up every single toy and did not let one go. He had all 9 stacked in his mouth and was just running around wide. And I was like, man, that's some toy drive. And I remember thinking that's kind of hard to work with at times.
Oh yeah. It's like, if I had hair sometimes,
you'd be pulling it out.
I'd have patches missing. But I've actually used exactly what you said, done there. And it's amazing how sometimes we have to knock them back a peg too, right? Because otherwise, if they're too high, there's no clarity.
No, exactly. And I mean, I've seen this in some of the service dogs and the labbies with like the desire to use food. is really good because we know labs have good food drive, but sometimes it just whips them up into a silly state. And often, the better thing to do is just use a little bit of gentle guidance. It's not yank and crank. It's just about just using the lead to guide them to where you want them to be, what positioning you want them to be in, instead of luring them with food and getting this, IPO performance heel out of a Labrador that you want to be a seeing eye dog. You're just like, hey, just, maybe we just use a lead to just gently guide them over this way, that we might get a more natural, smooth, appropriate response from the dog. So yeah, sometimes just taking it back and being as simple as possible and forgetting what we know about building drive, it can be the way to go, with particularly with lifestyle kind of skills,
Absolutely. Do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, the top one.
Yep.
Deb Edens asked, what feed and supplements do you use? What does their mealtime look like?
Yep.
Is it individual feeding or communal? And then on from that, I'd like to ask, does that change from when they're at work to at home?
Yeah. Yes, it changes from work to home. Jen's sister is a nutritionist, and I have an unreal zoo nutritionist, Michelle Shaw, who I've engaged her specifically for my Mao when he was young, to formulate a diet for him. And so, essentially all our dogs have a portion of kibble in their diet, because it's obviously so handy when you're in remote locations, that I need them all to be able to have, a predominant kibble diet. All of my dogs get greens, fish, rabbit, kangaroo, as often as possible, as often as it's available. In terms of supplements, there's some fish oil. There's, I'm a big fan of psyllium husk for dogs when they've, particularly I find with Rafa, a bit of psyllium husk in his food when he's, perhaps going through a little bit of a sensitive phase. It can help sort of make things coagulate. That's kind of about it. They run pretty well on that. We're trying to constantly evolve in what we learn and what we do. And Jen's definitely got a lot more expertise in that area than I do. But what she's really, the research that she's getting at the moment, and certainly in the results and the dog's poos that we're looking at, is, the closer to the source we can get and the more practical we can make it, the better the dogs are going to be. And then when you work them hard and you need those nutrient dense meals, that you get those nutrient dense meals from your kibbles and your high quality dog food products to bulk them up. So we do often need times where you just got to smash this dog with 2 or 3 feeds a day of high protein, high quality dog food. And then balance it out. So it fluctuates more than you'd think. We got a whiteboard here in the tack room next to the dog runs, and the staff basically, we edit it almost every day, and they take a photo and they send it to the group and go, that's what we're doing tomorrow for these dogs, based upon their workload, whether they're getting food rewards and things like that. So everyone is almost always individually fed for those reasons, because they are working dogs. Almost none of the dogs are ever on restricted food. They can usually eat as much as they want, because of the volume of work that they do and the Ks that they're running. And everyone is capable of having a scatter feed of kibble, which we do as an enrichment activity with the whole pack together. We might let them all out and scatter some good quality kibble around the yard, and I'll always just keep a loose eye on them. But yeah, they can do that, but I wouldn't do it with super high value food. I don't think anyone would really nail each other, but dogs.
Why take the chance, right?
Exactly, right. I don't need to. I don't need to prove anything. It's just not worth the risk for me with any of these dogs. And their relationships, they all love each other. They all respect each other so well. The pack that I've got here at the moment are just amazing. And, the only thing I think they can really reliably do is that scatter feed of the kibble, and anything else would, we'd start to get some lip curling and some crappy behavior. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I shouldn't say crappy, exactly. Normal dog behavior. Yeah. And, like Rafa, my Mao, he, like we've done so much counter conditioning with him when he's got bones and stuff that, like, if he sees a human approach him when he's got a bone, stands up and wags his tail, right? But he will growl at shadows and cars and birds and stuff when he's got a bone. He's instinctively guarding his bones, and, he knows how to guard articles and whatnot on cue. But, it just shows like when he sees and goes, oh, that's someone I know, he stands, leaves his bone and approaches them going, hey, you're going to give me a treat or tell me I'm a good boy for not killing you. But in his mind, really at his core, he's like, if a bad guy snuck out of the shadows to steal my bone, I'm going to rip their friggin' throat out, So, I never take that for granted.
Oh, that's awesome. One more question here from a different Deb Elegant. She's asked, what sort of priority do quolls have in your conservation work? We have had a number of quoll sightings and had National Parks and Wildlife Services out to try and catch some footage, but that's it. My eyes are going funny.
To no avail.
Yeah.
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 We live in regional New South Wales. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Quolls are a funny one. So going back probably like 4 or 5 years ago, there was a massive push for a whole heap of quoll surveys. And then the guidelines around how we classify where they are changed a year or two later. And basically the arse of the market fell out of that. There was no real need for quoll surveys at an official level. They're sort of now seen as a bit of a bonus bit of intel if we're surveying an area and we can verify there was quoll scats in there. At the moment, it's just kind of like a bit of a bonus. And truth be told, I don't think I've found many quoll scats in the last 2 years. It might just be where I've been working. I haven't seen that many. There are certain other like hot spots that I know that I'll be going to in about 3 or 4 weeks. So I would expect to find them. And they're a funny little creature that I was working with this ecologist, and we've got this like running theory that quolls do what we call a latrine. So they tend to poo in the same location frequently.
Cowpackers.
That's right. And but we would say they'd like around this mid-north coast area, they always like to poo with a view. So like poo like up high overlooking a body of water. And like ever since this ecologist, Nick, said to me, he's like, don't you reckon they always like taking a dump overlooking a body of water? All quoll latrines I've found now, they're all like these epic lookouts. I'm like, yeah, they're having
scenery.
Having their morning coffee and backing one out, just overlooking their body of water. So but honestly, I haven't seen that many in the last probably 2 years. But yeah, prior to that, I was getting a lot of hits around the mid coast region on those bodies of water, and they're considered to be a pretty widespread species.
Yeah, cool. Actually, while you're talking about backing it out, Deb also asked about how do you pull the dogs up at the flush stage?
I do a lot of work on long lines, a lot of work with toys, with pigeons, with chickens, and I teach the stop usually on my balcony or back tied with just me, and then I very slowly start to layer in so a toy with fur on it, and I'm getting the dog to move left and right on the front deck or back tied, move left and right, and then I go stop, reward the dog, move the dog left and right, and I might just place the fur toy on the ground, and a fur toy to a young gun dog, they go, oh shit, I want that, and I go stop, the dog stops, and I release them to the toy. I don't release them to the toy every single time, but sometimes I do because I want the dog on the edge thinking willy won't he, and that kind of creates that same sort of edginess that a real kangaroo or real rabbit will, if you never let them get the bumpers or the toys at home, they just sort of go, oh, that exercise is easy. And the first time they flush a bunny, they just go, hang on, this is not that exciting. Oh, well, this is very different to the toy, and they just go after it. But what I start to do is I make the bumper more exciting. It moves faster. It moves closer to the dog. It changes. It might have fresh fur on it. I've got remote control cars that I can put foxtails off the tail of the RC cars. I've got birds. I've got sheep. We used to have trained pigeons for it. And I'll have them in release boxes and stuff like that. So as the dog's running around, it pops up. The dog's on a long line. I say stop. If the dog doesn't stop, I apply a bit of pressure. As soon as the dog complies, they can either keep searching or they might get reinforced for it. Usually just the act of going back to work, again, like your Kelpies, is like you stop. The reward is you keep working. And that's very much the same with a lot of the gun dogs. So if you just pull up when I say you do, you can get back to work quickly.
You really have to build an addiction in your dogs, right? You really have to have them gambling that, hey, they're going to get to their reward. Yeah. And I suppose the reward has to outweigh, you have to pay more than withdrawals.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, I've seen it before where people have done these exercises, way too militant, and the dogs aren't getting enough real wins. And then, when they try and call them off a kangaroo, the dog's like, jam it. I've never seen anything this exciting before, and they go for the roo. And, to the point, like it's not, and I mean, I don't, I'm not talking out of my butt here, but when I raise my dogs for those kind of scenarios, because like I say, intensity equals rewards, and the harder I'm pushing you, the more likely I'm going to reward you. That the harder the situation, the better their responses are almost. And it's like Raph when he does his bite work. If he's holding a tennis ball or playing tug and I say leave, and it's just like a casual game of tug, like he lets go, it's fine, it's reliable. When he's on a suit with someone that's like swinging him around and fighting him and doing the full scene, and I say leave or out, he spits them out. Like it's the best one he ever does. And it's the same with the gun dogs. When they flush that rabbit right under their nose, like their butt leaves a hole in the ground, because we teach them that, the more challenging it gets, the more fun it gets, the more likely the rewards are going to come. And if they occasionally get ripped off, that's okay, because that's that gambling thing where there's like, wow, I didn't win that time. Oh, I had a miss. They didn't let me go and, grab the koala or grab whatever it is. Like, tomorrow he might. So, yeah.
And you've mentioned Raph there a couple of times. Do you want to give a plug to the other four-legged members of your team?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the team right now in the backyard, I've got the next oldest dog is Connor, who's an 8-year-old working line English Springer Spaniel. He's trained on alligator weed, hawkweed, and Parthenium weed. Then we've got Sally, who's a 8-year-old working line Cocker Spaniel. That was just my Malinois then taking my headphones out of my ears. You see him? He's just been leaning into me the whole time. Sally finds a rare underground orchid, and she also finds hawkweed. And then we have Dash, who is a very sensitive and sweet working line English Springer Spaniel who finds Parthenium weed, koala scats, and rats as well. She's the only dog I have that transfers readily between plants and animals. That's because she is one of those more sensitive dogs that really works for the ball and the handler. Her reward drive is through the roof, and she's not that hunty. She doesn't really think about the animal. When she finds rats, she's thinking about the odor and the ball. She doesn't want to grab a rat. Yeah. But the next dog on the list, Scout, when she's out there hunting, she's a fur dog. She wants them. She would love to grab the rat, grab the mouse, grab the bunny, whatever it is. But she knows she's got to be steady to shot, steady for investigations and whatnot. and she's a 2-year-old working line Cocker Spaniel. And she's the one I took into the city last week. And then I have Alice, who's a 9-month-old working line English Springer Spaniel from South Australia. Reward drive through the roof. Probably, and I'd hate to upset any of the other breeders, probably the best puppy I've ever had. Just so well-rounded. If I withhold the ball for like 2 seconds, she's like, okay, he's not giving it to me. Back to work. Search. If I call her, she sprints to me. If I throw the ball, she sends out for it like her life depends on it, and she delivers it straight back to me just as fast. For a 9-month-old dog, and I'm not saying she's the best dog I've ever had, but the best puppy I've ever had. Virtually came crate trained with ball drive and food drive. It's like, oh my gosh, how nice are you? Just if they were all like that, I'd just be, I'd be thinking I'm the man. But, it seems like I get one puppy that's really easy, and then the next, and I'm just like, how good are we? We're killing it. And then the next time I'm like, shit, it's trashing the house. It's escaping. It's, in the neighbor's paddock.
Have we ever done this before?
Yeah, exactly. That was the Cocker Spaniel, man. Like I told Brett, I wanted a handful. I was like, oh my God. Like, man, she stripped silicone out of windows. She ripped up like concrete joiners. She ate things. She had to get her stomach pumped like 3 times. She would attack the Malinois. She was a nutcase, but and then and then all my subbies and stuff. We've got these wonderful border collies. There's a Brittany Spaniel in there. There's working labs. There's other springers. There's lots of wonderful dogs on a list, too wide to list, and all with their own little bits of perfection that we go, that job just suits that dog. There's no weak links in the team. Everyone's got their strengths, and there's always a different job where like that that job is for that dog. They're going to be perfect at it, and they'll always have a backup. Which is lovely for the dogs and for the handlers.
Talking about your job, have you got a most memorable or one that's like most of a best achievement for you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that one's a bit of a no-brainer for me. I was so when my daughters were born, it was in the middle of the 2019-2020 summer bushfires, and they were super premature. Jen nearly died during their birth.
Oh, wow.
And my daughters were both really, really, really unwell. And anyway, when they were in hospital, the bushfires got really, really intense to a point where my son and I were stuck here at home on the roof, cleaning embers off the roof of our house. And Jen was stuck at the hospital. There's no way of getting to them. And then the fires ripped through critical koala habitat right near home, and an area that basically, was responsible for the reason we moved to Port Macquarie. And I'd worked closely with National Parks and the Koala Hospital in this very specific, tremendous block of land. And when I saw the fires rip through there, I sent out an email to a couple of key stakeholders, and I said, look, this is my situation that I'm in right now with Jan and the girls. And they were moving back and forth between Newcastle and Port Macquarie with the different specialists and whatnot. And I said, but, if I've got time in amongst my days, I'd be willing to come out and help find koalas on the fringes of the burnt areas, or look for burnt koalas. Because I knew that's what they do whenever there's big bushfires up here, because the koalas are so important in this region. And they said, mate, whenever you can fit in, you just let us know. You just come out and just squeeze it in. We appreciate your expertise and your dogs. The very next day I went out, full fire suit, worked through an area, and got a couple of easy wins, found a couple of koalas out in pretty scorched area. So it's pretty easy to find a koala in a scorched habitat. And then we started to work into some areas that hadn't yet burnt, but were about to be threatened. And I met up with a group of about 20 people from different organizations, and a lot of people that I hadn't worked with yet. And we just got into our first bit of green bush, and we knew that was about to burn like that afternoon. And Taylor ran out, and Taylor passed away last year. She was listed as the Royal Agricultural Society Hero Dog of the Year. She's won a whole heap of awards, and she died of a heart tumor last year. But
sorry to hear that, mate.
yeah, thanks. But anyway, she was hunting around, and she ran up to this big ute, sat on one side, eyeballed me, and I was just about to pay her because she never lied, so I knew there had to be something there. And then she ran around, sat to the other side of the tree, and looked at me. And I was like, okay. So I paid her, and then everyone's going, what was that about? I was like, I don't know. I'll send her in again. I go, show me. And she runs back to the tree, sits, alerts to one side, then spins around, goes the other side of the tree, sits and alerts again. Two very distinct indications. And I said to a few people, I was like, mate, I'm going to sound like I'm full of it here, but I think she's telling me there's a mum and a Joey up in that tree. And I swear I could feel people's eyes rolling. Maybe they weren't, but I thought they were like, yeah, whatever. Like the first time they'd worked with me. And they stood back, grabbed the binos, and like, bam, there's mum. Shit, and there's a Joey on the other side of the tree, And they got rescued. Yeah, they like it did burn that arvo, and we found them again later on. They survived. They ended up at the koala hospital, rehabbed, released, all that kind of stuff, But super intense moment for me for all reasons, like with the family and the kids and the fires and my properties being threatened, and and I wasn't being paid for any of that work during that time. I didn't take any money. I didn't do any press or anything like that for the first 2 months of doing it. I was just chipping away when I could, and then one day someone said, "Oh, you got to speak to the local news channel," and I'm like, I don't really want to. I just this is my sort of little thing that I'm just doing when I can and just trying to help out. And then I did one news interview, and then like 100 million views online later for the story. And that's when Bear, the other dog from Queensland, was doing the same job as well. And we all got a whole heap of press and a whole heap of work out of that. But the first 2 months of just kind of doing it under the radar and voluntary, and just in amongst hospital visits, super special. It brings a tear to my eye occasionally when I think about those days. And I worked around some properties around Taree and Tanoni, where I was working right through Christmas around there. Families, like little kids living in tents, and we're working around looking for koalas and seeing the families and the devastation that all these little families went through in these communities that didn't have home insurance and didn't have early warning systems in place. And, like most of us, no one knew how bad those fires were going to be. So, for a variety of different reasons, that job's just burnt into my soul, excuse the pun. But, and I'll never forget that time and all the different people that I worked with, and that little dog and those fines.
It sounds like a pretty special moment under some pretty stressful situations as well.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Mate, thanks for sharing that. Mate, it's probably come to that time of the night. We really appreciate your time today, or this evening. Mate, was there a question that stood out for you, and they will win a bag of Enduro high energy food for working dogs with Real Kangaroo, mate?
Mate, I think it's poignant that we're asked about nutrition and about food with working dogs. I think it's so I think it was Deb that asked that.
Deb Eden.
So you got a good memory too, mate.
Yeah, sometimes. I think it's always good. We can easily overlook that. And I think it's really important not to assume that what works for one dog is going to work for the other, whether it be volume of food or number of feeds per day or types of food. I think that's a space where, just like we try and take with animal training, to not just go, I know it all. It's always going to be this for Kelpies, and it's always going to be this for Malinois, that treat each dog as an individual, and their workload and whatnot should dictate their diet, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Deb, we've got your details, but congratulations. And Ryan, you get one as well for being the guest.
Thank you. Thanks, Enduro.
One last question as always, though. Would you rather fight one duck the size of a horse or 20 horses the size of ducks?
This is really interesting because he's such an environmentalist.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know, it's weird, but some part of me just would love the idea of just booting a small horse, like just like a footy, you know. I just feel like it'd just launch off the foot like
unicorns, making 20 little unicorns.
yeah, exactly. You know, whereas a duck, I feel like, man, you're in for a long haul, and swinging into that beak would suck. I just think, so I don't know. Someone said like the same thing, and you're like with toddlers, like, wouldn't you just love to run in the room and just start bashing toddlers? I'm like, it just sounds so inappropriate, but I'm like, I kind of get that with the small horses, you know.
Get them back your own for those early morning wake ups.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
That, mate, love it. That actually puts some thought into that.
Yeah.
I actually like that. That's cool. Mate, thank you very much for your time tonight. No, you've got a very busy schedule there. So thanks for giving us your time.
Very much appreciated.
Yeah.
To all our listeners watching live, thanks for getting on. We had a stack there. To everyone listening back, thank you for your time. And please remember, we learn every day. The day we stop learning is a sad day for all of us.
Thank you.
Thanks, mate. Have a good night.
You too.